The ballroom shimmered like something out of a dream, too perfect, too polished to belong to someone like me. Golden chandeliers cast warm light over polished marble floors, and laughter echoed beneath the high ceilings, as if happiness itself had been carefully curated for the evening. And yet, I wasn't part of it. I stood behind a tall decorative partition near the catering entrance, half hidden in the shadows, close enough to see everything but positioned as if I didn't belong. Which apparently I didn't. A waiter brushed past me with a tray of sparkling drinks, barely sparing me a glance. I could tell what he thought, that I was staff. I didn't correct him. I smoothed down my dark green dress, one I had saved months to afford. It was elegant, understated, never loud enough to compete with the glittering crowd in front of me. Around my neck rested a thin gold chain. It was the only piece of jewelry I had ever bought for myself without guilt. I had imagined this night differently. This was my daughter's engagement party. My daughter, Lily. I watched her from afar as she moved effortlessly through the room, glowing in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her hand rested lightly on the arm of her fiancé, Daniel, a man she had known for less than half a year but already seemed to orbit like the sun. Beside them stood his mother, Margaret. Margaret didn't walk, she commanded space. Every movement was precise, practiced, intentional. She greeted guests like a queen receiving her court, her voice smooth, her smile calculated. People leaned in when she spoke. And tonight, she was the one being thanked. For everything. For the venue. For the decor. For the experience. I almost laughed. Because every flower, every glass of champagne, every flicker of candlelight, it had all been paid for by me. 30 years of teaching. 30 years of saving, sacrificing, saying no to myself so I could say yes to my daughter. And yet here I was, hidden. Emma, there you are. I turned to see Lily approaching, her expression tight, her voice lowered as if she didn't want to draw attention to me. I've been looking for you, she said quickly, though her eyes kept darting toward the crowd. I've been here the whole time, I replied. That wasn't entirely true. I had tried, earlier, to step forward, to join, to belong. But Margaret had gently intercepted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Perhaps it would be more comfortable for you over there, she had suggested, gesturing toward the side area. Comfortable. Invisible. Lily tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. It's just, Daniel's family is very particular. They have certain expectations.
About what?
I asked quietly. She hesitated. About presentation. I let the words sit between us. So, I don't fit the presentation? I asked. Oh, Mom, please don't make it sound like that, she sighed. It's just for tonight. Margaret knows all the important people here. These connections matter. For Daniel's career, for our future. Our future. I wondered where I existed in that future. I'll come find you later, okay? She added quickly. Just stay here for now. And then she was gone again. Back into the light. Back into a world where I didn't seem to belong. I stayed where I was. I watched as Margaret wrapped an arm around Lily's shoulders, introducing her to guests with pride, as if she had raised her. I watched as Lily laughed, her posture shifting, her voice changing, becoming someone I didn't quite recognize. At one point, I saw her lean in toward Margaret and say something. Margaret smiled, and Lily called her Mom. Something inside me cracked. A server offered me a drink. I took it without thinking, the cold glass grounding me. Thank you, I murmured. He gave me a polite nod. For a moment, I considered telling him who I was. But what would that change? Later, as the evening carried on and speeches began, I stepped closer to the edge of the room, just enough to hear. Margaret stood with a microphone, her voice warm and practiced. "We are so proud to welcome Lily into our family," she said. "She's everything I could have hoped for in a daughter." Applause followed. No one questioned it. No one corrected it. I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not yet. Something quieter. Something colder.
Clarity.
As the crowd dispersed toward the dessert tables, I turned to leave. I didn't say goodbye. No one noticed. But as I passed near a group of guests, I overheard Margaret speaking again. "We've planned the most beautiful honeymoon for them," she said lightly. "A private villa, ocean views, absolutely perfect." Someone gasped in admiration. "That's incredibly generous of you." Margaret laughed softly. "Oh, well, technically Emma paid for it," she said. "But I arranged everything. She wouldn't really know how to choose something like that." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they were dismissive. As if I were irrelevant. I walked out before I could hear more. The night air was cool against my skin as I reached my car. My hands trembled slightly as I unlocked the door. Inside, in the quiet, I finally exhaled. For years, I had told myself that everything I did was for Lily. Every extra hour of work, every missed opportunity, every small sacrifice that added up to a life built around someone else. And tonight I had seen the result. I pulled out my phone, opened my email, scrolled until I found the booking confirmation. The honeymoon, $22,000. 15 years of careful saving. There was a button at the bottom. Cancel reservation. My thumb hovered over the screen. I had never been a spiteful person. I believed in kindness, in patience, in understanding. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about something else. Something I was only just beginning to understand. I pressed the button, confirmed the cancellation, and as the confirmation email appeared, I felt something unfamiliar settle inside me. Not guilt, not fear, but something stronger. For the first time in a very long time, I chose myself. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows stretch and shrink with the passing headlights outside my window, and for the first time in years, my mind wasn't filled with lesson plans, bills, or Lily's needs. It was filled with questions I had avoided my entire life. When exactly had I stopped existing as a person and become only a function, a provider, a support system, a background figure in someone else's story? By the time the pale morning light crept through the curtains, I already knew the answer wasn't simple, because it hadn't happened all at once. It had been gradual, almost invisible, like erosion. A quiet giving away of pieces of myself until there was barely anything left to claim as my own. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Lily used to do her homework, where I had spent countless nights helping her with projects, quizzing her before exams, pretending I wasn't exhausted after working double shifts, just to keep everything afloat. I wrapped my hands around the mug and let myself remember. Really remember, not the polished version I told others, but the truth. Lily was 8 when her father left. No dramatic fight, no warning, just a quiet exit, and a new life somewhere else with people who suddenly mattered more. I still remember Lily standing in the hallway that night, asking me if he was coming back, and how I had to choose my words carefully because I couldn't afford to break down. I told her we would be okay, that we were still a family, and I believed it, or at least I forced myself to. From that moment on, everything became about survival and stability. I worked more hours than I should have, took on extra tutoring, summer classes, anything that brought in even a little more money. Not because I wanted more, but because I was terrified of her having less. Less than her classmates, less than the life she had started with, less than what I thought she deserved. I kept her in private school even when it meant skipping vacations, skipping new clothes, skipping anything that wasn't essential for her future. I told myself it was temporary, that one day it would all pay off.
And in a way, it did.
Lily grew up confident, capable, polished. She never felt the absence of anything material. What she did feel, though I didn't see it then, was the quiet pressure to belong to a world that was never truly ours. As she got older, the gap between us didn't appear suddenly. It stretched slowly. At first, it was small things. Comments about how our house looked compared to her friends. Suggestions that maybe I should update my wardrobe. Little remarks that seemed harmless on the surface, but carried something deeper underneath. I ignored them. I told myself it was just teenage insecurity, just her trying to fit in. And maybe it was. But I never asked myself why fitting in required distancing from me. By the time she left for university, I had already poured nearly everything I had into her education. My savings were thinner than I liked to admit, my retirement plan more of a hope than a guarantee, but I didn't care. I was proud. She was stepping into a future I had worked so hard to build. That was where Daniel came in. She mentioned him casually at first, a classmate, then a friend, then suddenly someone much more important. When I finally met him, I noticed the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence of someone who had never had to question his place in the world. He was polite, charming even, but there was a distance in his eyes when he looked around my home, as if he were cataloging differences without meaning to. Lily noticed it too. I saw it in the way she straightened up, the way her tone shifted slightly, as if she were trying to match something invisible. That was the first moment I felt it, that subtle shift in her priorities. Not away from me entirely, but towards something else. Something shinier. Something more acceptable. Meeting his mother, Margaret, confirmed everything I hadn't wanted to admit. She had a way of speaking that sounded kind but felt measured, like every word had been chosen for effect. She asked about my work with a smile that suggested admiration, but her tone carried something else, something like polite dismissal. Teaching, to her, was noble but small, respectable but not impressive. And Lily, my Lily, noticed that too. She defended me, yes, but not with pride. With careful wording, as if trying to present me in a way that would fit into Margaret's world. That hurt more than any direct insult ever could. After that, things moved quickly. Lily graduated, started a job that I knew didn't fully support the lifestyle she suddenly had, but I didn't question it. I didn't want to. She talked about new restaurants, new friends, new opportunities. She visited less often. And when she did, she seemed distracted, like she was temporarily stepping back into a life she had already outgrown. I told myself this was normal, that children grow up, move on, build their own lives. But deep down, I felt it, that quiet, growing distance that no amount of sacrifice could bridge. When Daniel proposed, she called me immediately. Her voice was bright, excited, full of everything a mother should want to hear. And I was happy.
Truly.
But even in that moment, there was a shift. The wedding plans were already being shaped, not by her, not by me, but by Margaret. Venues, guest lists, expectations. All presented as opportunities, as generosity, as guidance. And my role? My role became financial. Not emotional, not central, just supportive. Writing checks, agreeing to decisions, staying in the background. I told myself it was fine, that this was just how things worked in their world, that my contribution didn't need recognition. But the engagement party changed something. It wasn't just about being placed out of sight. It wasn't just about hearing Margaret take credit. It was the realization that this wasn't temporary. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was my place in her new life. Convenient, useful, but invisible. And the worst part wasn't Margaret. It was Lily allowing it, accepting it, maybe even believing it was right. I took a sip of my now cold coffee and looked around my kitchen. Every corner of this house held a memory of her, her laughter, her tears, her milestones. But there was almost nothing that reflected me. My preferences, my dreams, my identity, they had all been quietly set aside over the years.
Not stolen.
Not demanded, given, freely, repeatedly, until there was almost nothing left. The cancellation of the honeymoon wasn't impulsive, not really. It felt sudden, but in truth, it was the result of years of small realizations finally aligning into one undeniable truth. I had taught my daughter how to value everything except me. Not intentionally, but effectively. I had shown her, through my actions, that my needs came last. That my role was to support, to provide, to disappear when necessary. And she had learned that lesson well. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me out of my thoughts. I didn't need to look to know it was her. Or maybe Margaret. Or both. I let it ring. For once, I didn't rush to respond, didn't feel that familiar urgency to fix, to explain, to smooth things over. Instead, I sat there in the quiet and allowed myself something new. Stillness. Not the empty kind I had lived with for years, but something fuller. Something that felt like space.
Space to think. Space to feel.
Space to exist without immediately giving that existence away to someone else. For the first time, I wasn't asking what Lily needed. I was asking what I needed. And I didn't have the full answer yet. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next would not look like the life I had been living. The phone didn't stop ringing that morning. I let it go to voicemail twice, then a third time, until the silence between calls felt heavier than the noise itself. I knew avoiding it wouldn't change anything. Eventually, I picked it up. Hello. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. On the other end, Lily didn't even bother with a greeting. Mom, what did you do? There was no concern, no curiosity, just accusation. I closed my eyes for a second, steadying myself against the familiar pull to apologize even when I wasn't wrong. Good morning to you too, Lily.
A pause.
Not long, but enough to confirm what I already suspected. She wasn't calling to understand. She was calling to fix what she saw as my mistake. Margaret just told me the honeymoon is cancelled. She continued, her tone sharp. Please tell me this is some kind of error. I walked slowly to the window, watching a neighbor walk their dog, the normalcy of it almost surreal compared to the tension in my chest. It's not an error, I said. I cancelled it. Silence. Then a breath, shaky and disbelieving. Why would you do that? She asked, her voice rising. Do you realize what this means? Everything's already been planned.
People know about it.
Daniel took time off work. This is humiliating.
Humiliating.
That word landed harder than anything else she had said. Not hurtful, not unfair, not confusing. Humiliating. I leaned my forehead lightly against the glass. Was it humiliating? I asked quietly, when I stood behind a partition at your engagement party like I didn't belong there? She exhaled sharply. Oh my God, Mom. Not this again. You're blowing that out of proportion. Margaret was just trying to organize things properly. You know how those events are. No, I replied, my voice steady now, stronger. I don't. Because I've never attended an event where the person who paid for everything was treated like staff.
That struck something.
I could hear it in the slight shift in her breathing. But she didn't soften. This isn't about that, she insisted quickly. This is about you pulling support at the last minute. That's not fair. I let out a small, humorless laugh. Fair, I repeated. Lily, I spent years making sure your life was fair. More than fair. I made sure you had everything, even when it meant I had almost nothing left for myself. And now you're telling me I'm being unfair because I decided not to fund a luxury honeymoon after being treated like I was invisible? There was movement on her end, muffled voices. She wasn't alone. Of course she wasn't. I'm coming over, she said abruptly. We need to talk about this face to face. Lily, we'll be there in an hour, she added, cutting me off before I could respond. Daniel and Margaret are coming too. And then she hung up. I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, my reflection faintly visible in the window. A year ago, no, even a week ago, I would have panicked. I would have rushed to clean, to prepare, to make everything perfect. I would have rehearsed apologies in my head, searching for the quickest way to restore peace. But now, something was different. I still felt the anxiety. Yes, it hadn't magically disappeared, but beneath it was something steadier. Something that didn't bend as easily. I spent the next hour quietly, deliberately. I made coffee, set out a plate of simple cookies. Not to impress, not to compensate, just because it felt like the right thing to do. When the doorbell rang, I didn't rush. I walked at my own pace and opened the door. Lily entered first, her expression tight, her eyes avoiding mine. Daniel followed, offering a polite nod that didn't quite reach his eyes. And then Margaret stepped in last, her presence filling the room as if she had been invited to take control of it. Emma, she began immediately, not waiting for anyone to settle. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I closed the door behind them. No, I said calmly. There hasn't. That seemed to catch her off guard, just slightly. She wasn't used to resistance. Canceling the honeymoon at this stage creates unnecessary complications, Daniel added, his tone measured, diplomatic. We're all very grateful for your contributions, but you expect them to continue? I finished for him. He hesitated. Well, yes. That was the agreement, wasn't it? No, I said. It was never an agreement. It was an offer. And I've changed my mind. Lily finally looked at me then, her frustration breaking through. You can't just change your mind, she said. Everything is already planned around it. I can, I replied. And I did. Margaret sighed softly, stepping forward as if addressing a child. Emma, I understand you may have felt uncomfortable at the engagement party, she said, choosing her words carefully. But that arrangement was for your benefit. Those events can be overwhelming if you're not used to that environment. For a moment, I just looked at her. Not with anger, not even with disbelief. Just clarity. For my benefit, I repeated slowly. Being hidden away at my own daughter's celebration was for my benefit. Exactly, she said, relieved as if I had finally understood. We wanted to make sure you were comfortable. I let out a quiet breath. You didn't want me visible, I said. Lily stepped in quickly. Mom, you know how you get in social situations, she said, her tone softer now, almost pleading. You start talking about work or things people don't really relate to. Margaret was just trying to help everything flow better. I turned to her. You mean she was trying to make sure I didn't embarrass you? That's not what I said, she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. You didn't have to, I said gently. The room fell quiet for a moment. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Margaret's patience was thinning. I could see it in the tightness around her eyes. This isn't productive, she said finally. What matters is moving forward. The honeymoon needs to be reinstated. We can handle the arrangements, of course, but the funding… No, I said. Just that one word. Simple.
Clear.
Final. It landed heavier than anything else I had said. Excuse me? Margaret asked, her tone sharpening.
Oh, hirapa?
I'm not paying for it. Lily stared at me as if she didn't recognize me. Mom, I'm not paying for the honeymoon. I continued, my voice steady. And I won't be contributing anything further to the wedding. That broke something. Are you serious? She asked, her voice cracking. Do you have any idea what you're doing? This affects everything. Yes, I said. I know exactly what I'm doing. You're ruining this, she whispered. You're ruining my wedding. I felt the familiar sting of guilt rise, but this time, it didn't take over. No, I said softly. I'm just no longer sacrificing myself to make it look perfect. Margaret stood up abruptly, smoothing her jacket. If this is your final position, she said coolly, then we'll handle things ourselves. Come on, Lily. For a moment, Lily didn't move. She looked at me, as if waiting, hoping I would back down like I always had before. I didn't. Something in her expression shifted. Disappointment, anger, maybe even a little disbelief. I never thought you could be this selfish, she said quietly. Selfish. The word echoed in the room long after they left.
The door closed.
Silence followed. I stood there, alone again, but it didn't feel the same as before. It wasn't empty. It wasn't hollow. It was still, honest, real. I walked slowly back into the living room and sat down, my hands resting in my lap. My heart was racing, my chest tight, but beneath all of that was something else. Something I had never truly felt before. Not guilt, not regret, not fear.
Strength.
Quiet, unfamiliar, but undeniable. For the first time in my life, I had said no, and meant it. And no matter what came next, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going back. The silence after they left didn't feel like loss. It felt like space. Not the kind that echoes with loneliness, but the kind that allows something new to finally exist. I stood in the middle of my living room for a long time, looking around as if I were seeing it for the first time. The furniture I had chosen out of practicality, not desire. The curtains I had never replaced because there was always something more important. The walls filled with photos of Lily, her milestones, her achievements, her life. There were almost none of me. It was as if I had lived here only as a witness, not as a person. That realization didn't hurt the way I expected it to. It didn't break me. It clarified everything.
I didn't cry that day.
I thought I might, but the tears never came. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my laptop not to pay bills or check school emails, but to search for something I wanted. Not needed. Wanted. The distinction felt strange, almost uncomfortable. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I typed. Beginner art classes near me. I don't even know why that came to mind at first. Maybe because it was something I used to love, something I had quietly buried under responsibilities. Before Lily, before the constant pressure to provide, I had worked with clay. I remembered the feeling of it. Cool, grounding, forgiving. You could reshape it as many times as you needed before it became something final. I think, in that moment, I realized I wanted that for myself too. I found a small community studio offering evening pottery classes. 8 weeks. Affordable, but still something I would have once considered unnecessary. I stared at the registration page longer than I should have. Old habits don't disappear overnight. My mind immediately began calculating, what else could that money go toward? What if something unexpected came up? What if Lily needed it? That last thought stopped me. Not because it was unreasonable, but because it was automatic, instinctive. And for the first time, I questioned it. What if, just this once, I didn't prioritize her future over my present? Before I could talk myself out of it, I clicked register. The confirmation email appeared seconds later. It was such a small action, but it felt significant, like the first brick in something entirely new. That decision opened something in me I hadn't realized was closed. Over the next few days, I started making other choices, small at first, almost cautious. I scheduled an appointment at a salon, something I hadn't done properly in years. Not a quick trim squeezed between responsibilities, but an actual appointment where someone asked me what I wanted. I didn't even know how to answer at first. I had spent so long adapting to what was practical that preference felt unfamiliar. But slowly, hesitantly, I began to figure it out. I chose a softer style, something that framed my face instead of hiding it. When I looked in the mirror afterward, I didn't see a different person. I saw a version of myself that had been waiting. The house came next. Not a complete transformation, not something dramatic, but intentional changes. I painted the walls a muted green instead of the neutral beige I had settled for years ago. I replaced the worn sofa with something comfortable and inviting, not just functional. I moved things around, opened up space, added pieces that felt like they belonged to me, not to a role I had been playing. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a place built around someone else's life. It felt like mine. Of course, the messages didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. Calls from Lily, texts from Daniel, even messages from Margaret, all carrying different tones, but the same underlying expectation that I would reconsider, that I would return to the role they were comfortable with. I read them, but I didn't respond. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because I needed the silence. I needed time to hear my own thoughts without them being immediately shaped by someone else's needs. That silence became something sacred, protective. A week later, I made another decision that would have once felt impossible. I called my friend Clara. We had worked together for years, shared lunches, small conversations between classes, but never really stepped beyond the boundaries of routine. She had retired the year before and invited me more than once to join her on trips or workshops. I had always declined. There was always a reason. This time, when she answered, I didn't search for one. "Is that invitation still open?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "Of course it is. A writing retreat by the coast. 2 weeks away.
No obligations. No expectations. Just time."
I booked it that same day. When Lily showed up at my door unannounced a few days later, I could see the change in her immediately, not because she had changed, but because I had. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room, confusion replacing her usual certainty. "What happened here?" she asked. I shrugged lightly. "I made some changes." She looked around again, slower this time, as if trying to understand something she couldn't quite name. "Now," she said, "with the wedding coming?" I gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, restless. "We need to talk about the honeymoon," she continued. I shook my head gently. "There's nothing to discuss." That frustrated her. I could see it in the way her posture stiffened. "You're really not going to fix this?" she asked. "Fix what?" I replied. "The part where I stopped pretending I'm okay with being treated like I don't matter?" That wasn't the response she expected. It threw her off balance for a moment. "So this is punishment," she said.
No, I answered it calmly.
"This is a boundary." The word seemed unfamiliar to her, or maybe just uncomfortable. "It feels like the same thing," she muttered. "It's not," I said. "Punishment is about controlling someone else. This is about no longer abandoning myself." She didn't know what to say to that. I could see the conflict in her expression, part anger, part confusion, part something softer she wasn't ready to admit. "I don't even recognize you," she said finally. I nodded. "Neither do I admitted. "But I think that's a good thing." When I told her I was leaving for 2 weeks, she stared at me like I had just announced something reckless. "You can't just leave," she said. "There's still so much to plan." "You'll figure it out," I replied. "You always do." She shook her head, frustrated. "You're choosing this over me." I met her gaze, steady and calm. "No," I said. "I'm finally choosing myself too." After she left, the house felt quiet again, but not empty. I packed slowly, deliberately. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to be present in the moment. Every item I placed in my suitcase felt like a decision, not just about the trip, but about the life I was beginning to build. The night before I left, I sat outside with a glass of wine, watching the sky darken. For years, my thoughts at night had been filled with planning, worrying, preparing. That night, they were open, unstructured.
Free.
I thought about the classes, the trip, the changes in my home, the silence between me and Lily. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. The next morning, as I turned off my phone before heading to the airport, I realized something that both frightened and comforted me. I didn't know what would happen next. Not with Lily, not with the wedding, not with anything beyond the next few weeks. But for the first time in decades, that uncertainty didn't feel like failure. It felt like possibility. Almost a year passed before I saw Lily again. Not a dramatic year, not one marked by big, visible turning points, but one filled with quiet, consistent change. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but slowly reshapes everything. My life didn't become perfect, it became mine. The pottery classes turned into something more than just a hobby. They became a rhythm, a place where time felt different, slower, intentional. My hands, once used for grading papers and organizing other people's needs, began creating things that existed simply because I wanted them to. Bowls, cups, imperfect shapes that somehow felt more honest than anything I had built before. I converted part of my garage into a small studio, nothing extravagant, but enough to call my own. I started selling pieces at local markets, then through small exhibitions. Not for the money, though that came too, but for the quiet pride of seeing something I made valued by someone else, not because I sacrificed for it, but because I created it. The silence between me and Lily never fully disappeared during that year. It settled into something distant, but stable. We didn't fight. We didn't reconcile. We simply existed apart. I sent her a short message on her wedding day months earlier, simple and sincere. No accusations, no explanations, just a wish for happiness. She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. At first, that hurt more than I admitted to myself. But over time, the absence of constant tension became its own kind of relief. I learned to sit with that contradiction, the love I still had for her, and the boundaries I refused to break again. They didn't cancel each other out. They coexisted. That Wednesday afternoon, I was in my studio, elbows dusted with clay, shaping a piece that had already been reshaped 3 times. The radio played softly in the background, something I wasn't really listening to. I almost didn't hear the doorbell. It took a second ring to pull me out of my focus. I wiped my hands on a cloth and walked toward the door, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. When I opened it, I froze. Lily stood there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked different. Not drastically, not in a way that would stand out to anyone else, but I could see it immediately. The sharpness she had carried for so long was softened. Her posture wasn't as rigid. There was something uncertain in her expression, something real. "Hi," she said quietly. It wasn't the confident voice I was used to. It was careful, measured. I stepped aside.
Lily, come in."
She hesitated for just a second before walking in, her eyes moving slowly across the room. She took in the changes, the colors, the space, the absence of the life she remembered. "It looks different," she said. "Better," I replied simply. She nodded, almost to herself.
"Yeah,
"It does." We stood there for a moment, the silence stretching, but it wasn't as heavy as I expected. It wasn't filled with anger. It was filled with everything we hadn't said. "You were working?" she asked, gesturing toward my hands. "I was," I said. "I can show you if you want." She gave a small nod. "I'd like that." I led her to the studio. She stepped inside slowly, looking around with quiet curiosity. Shelves lined with finished pieces, tools neatly arranged, a work table marked with traces of clay and effort. "You made all this?" she asked. "Yes." There was no hesitation in my voice this time.
No minimizing. No deflecting.
Just truth. She picked up a small bowl carefully, turning it in her hands. "It's beautiful," she said softly. I watched her, noticing the way she handled it, with care, with respect. That alone told me something had changed. We moved back into the kitchen, and I made tea without asking what she wanted. I already knew. Some things don't disappear, no matter how much time passes. When we sat down, she didn't speak immediately. She held the cup in both hands, staring into it as if searching for the right place to begin. "I'm pregnant," she said finally. The words were simple, but they carried weight. A lot of it. I felt the reaction instantly. Surprise, yes, but also something deeper.
A shift.
A new layer to everything between us. "Congratulations," I said gently. "How are you feeling?" She gave a small, tired smile. Different. Tired. A little scared. I nodded. "That sounds about right." She let out a quiet breath, and for a moment, she looked younger. Not in appearance, but in presence. "That's not the only reason I'm here," she added. I didn't interrupt. I let her take her time. "I've been thinking a lot," she continued, her voice unsteady but honest. "About everything. About you. About how I acted." She paused, then looked up at me directly. "You were right. That wasn't something I expected to hear. Not from her. Not like this." "About what?" I asked carefully.
About all of it, she said.
"About Margaret. About how I treated you. About how I let things happen." Her fingers tightened slightly around the cup. "I thought I was building a better life. I thought I was moving forward. But I was just trying to fit into something that was never really mine." I stayed quiet, letting her continue. "After the wedding, things didn't magically become perfect," she said with a small, humorless smile. "Margaret didn't step back. She stepped in more. Everything had to be her way, our apartment, our routines, even how I should think about the future. And I went along with it. At first." She swallowed. "But when I found out I was pregnant, something changed." She started making plans again. For the baby. For our life. And when I disagreed, she said something that I couldn't ignore. Her voice tightened. She said she would make sure my child was raised properly. Not like me. I felt a quiet anger rise, but I didn't let it take over. This wasn't about Margaret anymore. This was about Lily finally seeing something clearly. "And that made you think of me," I said softly. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "It made me realize that I had become exactly what I used to hate. Someone who measures people by appearances. Someone who hides the things that don't fit." Her voice broke slightly. "I hid you." The words hung between us.
Honest.
Heavy. Real. "I know," I said. Not harsh. Not accusing. Just true. "I'm sorry," she said, and this time there was no hesitation. "I don't expect you to just forgive everything. I don't expect things to go back to how they were. But I don't want my child to grow up without knowing you. Without knowing the person who gave me everything I took for granted." I looked at her for a long moment. I saw the difference now, not just in what she said, but in how she said it. There was no performance.
No justification.
Just accountability. "I'm not interested in going back to how things were," I said carefully. "But I am open to building something new." Her expression softened immediately, relief mixing with emotion. "Really? Really," I said. "But it has to be different. I won't disappear again. I won't be treated like I don't matter. And I won't compete with anyone for a place in your life." She nodded quickly. "I understand."
Ido.
Good, I said gently. Then we can start there. We sat together a little longer, talking not perfectly, not easily, but honestly, about her life, about mine, about everything that had changed. When she stood to leave, there was a hesitation again, but this time it felt different. Can I come back? She asked. Maybe you could teach me? I smiled slightly. I'd like that. And when she stepped forward, uncertain but hopeful, I didn't hesitate. I hugged her. After she left, I went back to the studio. The piece I had been working on earlier was still there unfinished. I sat down, placed my hands on the clay, and began shaping it again. Not forcing it, not rushing it, just working with it, allowing it to become what it needed to be. For the first time, I understood something clearly. You can't control what people become. You can only decide who you choose to be. And finally, I had chosen.